What's up guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is James Blissett. I'm a professional gambler and founder of Lucrative MMA, which is my handicapping service where I help people make money from betting on MMA. In this video, we're going to be speaking about bad judging in MMA. This is something that plagues the MMA world, and to us gamblers who bet on MMA, it plagues our bankrolls. I'm going to tell you ways in which you can minimize the risk and minimize the damage that the judges do to you when they make these bad decisions. So if you want to earn more money and stop losing money on bad decisions, keep watching. First off, it's important to understand that bad judging is simply just a part of the sport of MMA. No matter how much research, analysis, and predictions you do, there is no way to completely avoid bad judging. You have to accept it. And you have to accept that at some point in your gambling career, you're going to be on the end of some bad decisions. However, the good news is that bad judging goes both ways. These judges are not out there and have a vendetta against you personally. So, the key to this is to gamble on a long enough time scale. You could go for a 6-month period where every single fight that goes to a controversial decision, you lose money from that decision. But maybe 6 to 12 months later, there's a streak of 6 months where every single fight that goes to a controversial decision, you win money on. So the thing about variance is that it's random. So you have to bet on a long enough time scale for that randomness to even out. Bad judging is frustrating, but it's important to understand that over the long term, it should even out. With that being said, since we can classify bad judging as variance in MMA because you're going to get positive sides of it and negative sides of it, we have to understand, like I just mentioned, that that variance isn't linear. It's not going to be a 1-for-1. You'll go through good and bad streaks with the judging. So while it's important to understand that it's variance and you can't control it, because we can't control it and it may take a long time for us to see that positive variance, it's important to minimize risk while you're going through that bad variance. So you probably ask, how can you minimize that risk from bad judging? Well, one tip I'm going to give you today is to simply avoid betting on fights that you think are likely to go to a close competitive decision, especially if you are laying chalk on the fighter that you're betting on. Every now and then when you're studying for a fight, you will see that a fight is typically going to be a close competitive fight. You may be picking one fighter to win, but you can understand that it's probably not going to be a complete blowout. And if you're thinking that fight is also going to go to decision, well then you have to be very careful, because if you bet on a side at -200, for example, and it's a decently competitive fight that goes to decision, well the chances of that fighter being robbed the decision, even if he's won it, is a lot higher than another fight where, for example, you think the fighter is going to get the submission, or you think the fighter is going to get a knockout win. Basically, any fight that you think is going to go to decision, you have to take a step back and think, okay, is it actually worth risking this bet? Is it worth me risking a sweaty decision at the hands of the judges? Or is it better I look for another spot that is less likely to go to decision, or at least less likely to be a close competitive decision? Now, to add on to that point, if you do think a fight's going to be close and competitive, and you think that more often than not it will go to decision, look to play the underdog. Now obviously every single fight is his own fight, so I'm not saying this on a broad scale. But sometimes you'll get a fighter at +160, +170. Well, if you think the fight's going to be back and forth, and you're factoring potentially the judges getting it wrong, like they do almost every single week, at least one judge gets one scorecard wrong every single week in MMA. It's absolutely crazy. So if we accept that fact, then bet on the underdog, or at least look to bet on the underdog. Because we know, if we're betting on a +150, that's an implied probability of 40%. If you think the fight's going to be close, competitive, and it's going to go to decision, and you've got a +150, well then we have to be aware that the judges may get it wrong. So that +150 now turns into a +125, or at least potentially gives it a better chance to hit, even if the fighter doesn't deserve the decision. I do this all the time when I'm betting on MMA. I look at fights, and if I think one fight's going to be close and competitive, I look to bet the underdog. That's one of the number one tenets of how I bet on sports. I evaluate the fight, I see if someone's an underdog. If I think it's going to be close and competitive, I'm going to bet on the underdog. Now, when we factor in the bad judging, I'm even more likely to bet in the underdog. Yes, it may go against me, but if I'm betting on a plus number, the variance is going to work out in my favor overall. So those are two really important things that you have to understand when you're betting on MMA. We can't ignore the judging spectacle entirely. When we're capping MMA, especially these days, especially in 2023, we have to understand that bad judging is an aspect of the sport and we have to cap it in. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to take over the way you cap fights, right? I'm not going to say that you're going to be scared to back any fighter that you think is going to win by a decision. In fact, I bet on fighters who I think are going to win by decision all the time. In fact, you could argue I favor fighters that I think can win via decision, because then I'm not betting on fighters that can only finish the fight. I like fighters who can win minutes, not fighters that have to get a submission or have to get a knockout. I've won a lot of money on fighter wins via decision, but I've also won a lot of money on fighters that are plus 150, plus 170, plus 200, plus 300 underdogs that I think are going to have a chance of winning a controversial decision, because I think the fight's going to be fairly close and because I'm capping in the aspect of the bad judges. One last tip I'll leave you with is a lot of times we see fighters fighting in their hometowns. You know, there's something in sports, not just MMA, but also boxing, called hometown robberies, right? That means that the judges scored a fight for the hometown fighter, the fighter who is fighting in his hometown, in his home country, even if that fighter didn't necessarily win the fight. Now, you can use this to your benefit, because when you're looking at these fighters, when you're betting on MMA, you want to look at who's fighting at home, who's fighting in their home country, more importantly, who's fighting in their home city. Oftentimes the crowd is going to be cheering super loud for these fighters because they're from there, and people tend to support people that are from the same place as them. So if the crowd is screaming so much for one fighter, anytime they land a kick, anytime they land a punch, get a takedown, whatever it may be, and then the crowd is completely silent for the other fighter, anytime they land a punch, kick, or a takedown, then the judges may be swayed by this, right? And this is an aspect of bad judging, because if you was a perfect judge, if you was a really good judge, you wouldn't let the fans persuade you. But we know that these judges don't do that. Hometown robberies are a thing. So that's another thing you can do. When you're looking at the upcoming slate on the weekend, next weekend, whenever it may be, check if any fighters are fighting at home and just add another couple percent and just use that piece of information to your advantage. Now, disclaimer, when you're watching these videos I make, this video today, any other video, never use one piece of information or one strategy to completely dictate how you bet. What you do is you take the aspect of bad judging, you take the aspect of hometown robberies, you take the aspect of whatever else I speak about on this YouTube channel, and you just add it into your capping. It helps you a couple of percent, and these small percentages add up in the long term. There's a lot of money to be made capitalizing on bad judging and avoiding fights where there's potential to be bad judging. You're never going to be able to avoid it all, but you can minimize the risk, you can minimize the damage to your bankroll if you take these tips on board. So I'll conclude this video by saying that bad judging is unfortunately probably here to stay. You have to accept that reality and know how to use it to your favor if you want to make more money on this sport. While it's impossible to avoid entirely, you can minimize the damage by the things I've told you today. Those are, look to avoid betting on fights that are likely to go to a close competitive decision. Look to bet on big underdogs in fights that are likely to go to a close competitive decision. And finally, look for fighters that are fighting in their hometowns, in their home countries, in their home cities, and look to bet on those fighters. Understand that no strategy is foolproof. There's going to be times when you do this and you still lose money. There's going to be times when you bet on the Brazilian in Brazil and he still gets robbed of a decision. It's just the way it is. But if you implement these tips and tricks, you can make a lot more money. So make sure you remember what I told you in this video today, and hopefully you'll see your betting profits increase over time. Thanks for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.